The morning I found the citation tucked into my front door. I was still wearing my bathrobe and holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hand. March in Boulder, Colorado was doing its usual dance between winter and spring, and the snow that had blanketed our neighborhood for weeks was finally beginning its slow retreat. The pink slip of paper fluttered in the breeze, and when I unfolded it, my blood pressure shot through the roof. $250 for failing to clean up after my dog, with photographic evidence attached showing several piles of waste scattered across the common area near my property line. I stared at the photos, my jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth grinding. The problem was simple and infuriating. I did not have a dog. I had never owned a dog. I was allergic to dogs, for crying out loud. My name is Harrison Fletcher, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Commons development for 3 years. It was one of those planned communities that looked picture perfect from the outside, with matching mailboxes and strict rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. The Homeowners Association ran the place with an iron fist, and at the helm was a woman named Patricia Thornton, who seemed to derive genuine pleasure from finding violations and issuing fines. I marched back inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the HOA office number listed on the citation. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. Meadowbrook Commons HOA, this is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Harrison Fletcher from 428 Meadowbrook Lane. I just received a citation for dog waste, and there has been a serious mistake. Oh, Mr. Fletcher. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. I can assure you there is no mistake. We have photographic evidence from our community inspection yesterday morning. The waste was located in the common area directly adjacent to your property. I do not own a dog, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I have never owned a dog. I am literally allergic to them. Well, the evidence speaks for itself. Perhaps you had visitors with pets. Regardless, homeowners are responsible for their property boundaries and the adjacent common areas. The fine stands. You cannot be serious right now. Mr. Fletcher, if you wish to dispute this citation, you may submit a formal appeal in writing within 10 business days. The appeals committee meets once a month. Until then, the fine remains active and will accrue late fees if not paid within 30 days. Have a wonderful day. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at the citation and feeling my frustration build. $250 for something I did not do. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I pulled on jeans and a jacket and walked outside to inspect the common area myself. The temperature was hovering around 40 degrees, and water dripped steadily from the eaves of houses as the snow continued its thaw. The common area was a narrow strip of grass and landscaping that ran between the backs of properties, maintained by the HOA and technically belonging to no one and everyone at the same time. When I reached the area shown in the photographs, I could see what Patricia had documented. There were indeed several piles of dog waste emerging from the melting snow, brown and disgusting in the weak morning sunlight. But as I stood there looking at them, something clicked in my mind. These piles were not fresh. They were old, frozen solid, and had clearly been buried under snow for weeks. The snow had only started melting in the past 48 hours. Before that, everything had been covered by at least 6 inches of white powder. I pulled out my phone and started taking my own photographs, documenting everything I could see. The position of the waste, the state of the melting snow, the distance from my back fence. As I worked, I heard voices from the next street over and the sound of dogs barking. That was when the second piece of the puzzle fell into place. Patricia Thornton lived 3 houses down from me on the adjacent street, and Patricia Thornton owned not one but 2 large golden retrievers that I frequently saw running around the neighborhood, not on leashes, not in her yard, just roaming freely through the common areas and between properties. I had complained about it before, actually. 6 months ago, I had called the HOA office to report that unleashed dogs were digging in the common area landscaping and leaving waste everywhere. Patricia herself had taken my call and assured me she would look into it. Nothing had changed. A slow smile spread across my face as I continued photographing the scene. If Patricia wanted to play this game, I could play it better. I spent the rest of that day researching. Colorado had specific laws about pet waste and leash requirements. Boulder County was even stricter, with ordinances requiring dogs to be leashed at all times except in designated off-leash areas. The Meadowbrook Commons HOA rules, which I downloaded from their website, specifically stated that all pets must be leashed when outside of their owner's private property, and that owners were responsible for immediately cleaning up after their animals. I also pulled up weather data for the past month. Boulder had received heavy snowfall from February 10th through February 28th. The common area behind my house had been completely covered during that entire period. The thaw had only begun on March 16th, just 2 days ago. Any dog waste currently visible had to have been deposited before the snow arrived, or during the few days when the snow was falling, meaning it had been sitting there for at least 2 to 3 weeks. I had moved into my house on May 15th 3 years ago. I had never owned a pet. My lease history and purchase records would prove that. But more importantly, I had something even better. 2 months ago, tired of packages being stolen from front porches in the neighborhood, I had installed a comprehensive security camera system. 4 cameras covered different angles of my property, including one pointed directly at the back fence line and the common area beyond it. The system stored footage for 90 days before overriding. I pulled up the footage and started reviewing it. I went back to February before the big snow and began watching at high speed. It took hours, but I was determined, and what I found was exactly what I suspected. On February 8th, 2 days before the big snow started, Patricia Thornton's 2 golden retrievers appeared on camera at 3:15 in the afternoon. They were running loose, no leashes, no owner in sight. They wandered through the common area, sniffed around the landscaping, and then, clear as day, both dogs defecated in the exact spots shown in Patricia's citation photographs. They ran off seconds later, and no one came to clean anything up. I watched the footage 3 times to make sure I had not misunderstood what I was seeing. Then I checked the dates on the next few days. On February 9th, the same 2 dogs appeared again, this time at 5:30 in the evening. Same routine, same result, same lack of cleanup. On February 10th, the snow started falling. Within hours, everything was covered. The waste, the evidence, all of it disappeared under a white blanket that would not melt for over a month. I saved all the relevant footage and burned it to multiple backup drives. Then I started compiling my evidence package. Photographs of the current scene, weather data showing the snow coverage, screenshots of the HOA rules about leash requirements and waste cleanup. And most importantly, the security camera footage clearly showing Patricia's own dogs creating the mess she was now trying to fine me for. But I did not stop there. If I was going to do this, I wanted to do it right. I filed a formal written appeal with the HOA as Patricia had instructed, but I also started documenting current violations. Every evening for the next week, I watched for Patricia's dogs, and like clockwork, they appeared. March 19th at 6:10 in the evening, both dogs running loose through the common areas. I photographed them from my yard and noted the time and date. March 20th at 4:45 in the afternoon. Same thing. This time they dug up some of the HOA's landscaping near the mailboxes. I got video. March 21st, both dogs again, this time with waste left behind in the common area near another neighbor's property. I documented everything and noted that no one came to clean it up. On March 22nd, I expanded my investigation. I walked through the neighborhood and talked to other residents. I knocked on doors and asked casual questions about the HOA and whether anyone else had issues with loose dogs or unfair citations. The floodgates opened. I met Robert Chen, who lived 2 streets over, and he had received a citation for an unregistered vehicle even though his car was properly registered, and he had provided proof. The citation stood, and he had paid the fine rather than deal with the appeals process. I met Jennifer Morrison, who had been fined for a lawn violation during a week when she had been in the hospital and physically unable to mow. The fine stood. I met David Kowalski, who had complained about unleashed dogs damaging his garden and had been told by Patricia that she would look into it. Nothing had happened, but 2 weeks later, David received a citation for his trash cans being visible from the street, even though it was trash collection day. A pattern was emerging, and it was ugly. Patricia Thornton was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, issuing citations to anyone who complained or anyone she simply did not like while ignoring violations by herself and her friends. I collected statements from 7 different homeowners, all documenting similar experiences. Some were willing to provide written affidavits. Others just wanted to vent, but were too afraid of retaliation to go on record. On March 25th, I received a response to my appeal. It was a form letter stating that the appeals committee had reviewed my case and found no grounds to overturn the citation. The fine remained in effect, and I now had less than 3 weeks to pay before late fees would begin accruing. The letter was signed by 3 members of the appeals committee: Patricia Thornton, Linda Benson, and Gary Hughes. I recognized all 3 names. Patricia was the HOA president. Linda lived next door to Patricia and was frequently seen having coffee on Patricia's back deck. Gary was married to Patricia's sister. The appeals committee was a joke, a rubber stamp for whatever Patricia wanted. I had been planning to present my evidence to the appeals committee and resolve this through official channels. But if the official channels were rigged, I needed a different approach. On March 26th, I called the Boulder County Animal Control Office and filed a formal complaint about unleashed dogs running loose in Meadowbrook Commons. I provided my address, described the dogs and their owner, and mentioned that I had video evidence of repeated violations. A tired-sounding woman named Rachel took my report and said an officer would follow up within 5 to 7 business days. She sounded like she had heard this story 1,000 times before. I also contacted a lawyer. His name was Marcus Webb, and he specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Boulder, and I met with him on March 27th. Marcus was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I spread my evidence across his conference table and walked him through everything. The citation, the photographs, the weather data, the security camera footage, the pattern of unfair enforcement, the statements from other homeowners. He watched the security footage twice, his expression growing more interested with each viewing. "This is good," he said finally. "This is really good. You have clear evidence that the HOA president issued you a citation for violations committed by her own pets. That is fraud, abuse of authority, and depending on how deep this goes, potentially criminal misconduct. What are my options? Several. You could sue the HOA for the citation and damages. You could file a complaint with the Colorado State Oversight Board for HOAs. You could go to the media and create public pressure. Or you could do all three. What would you recommend? Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The lawsuit would take time and money, though I think you would win. The state complaint would trigger an investigation, but those can take months or years. The media approach would be fastest and would create immediate pressure, but it might make you unpopular with your neighbors. Some of my neighbors have been dealing with the same abuse, I said. I think more people would support this than you might expect. Then here is what I suggest. Write a detailed letter to Patricia and the HOA board laying out your evidence and demanding that the citation be withdrawn and that the HOA begin properly enforcing leash and cleanup rules. Give them a deadline, say 1 week. If they refuse or ignore you, we go public and file the lawsuit simultaneously. The public pressure will force them to act, and the lawsuit will ensure there are consequences. What about the other homeowners who have been mistreated? If they are willing to join, we could potentially file a class action. That would be much bigger and could result in significant changes to how the HOA operates. I left Marcus's office with a plan and a sense of purpose. That evening, I drafted the letter he had suggested. It was 4 pages long and methodical. I laid out every piece of evidence, included timestamps and dates, and attached still images from the security footage. I demanded that the citation against me be withdrawn with a written apology, that Patricia's own violations be addressed, and that the HOA begin enforcing its rules fairly and consistently. I gave them until April 3rd to respond, exactly 1 week. I sent the letter by certified mail and also delivered copies in person to every member of the HOA board. There were 5 board members total: Patricia as president, Linda as vice president, Gary as treasurer, Susan Miller as secretary, and Tom Brennan as a general member. Tom was the only one I had any hope for. He was a retired engineer who had moved to Meadowbrook Commons 2 years ago and had been elected to the board by running on a platform of fiscal responsibility and fair enforcement. From what I had heard, he and Patricia clashed regularly. I dropped the letter at his house last, and he answered the door with a curious expression. "Mr. Fletcher, right? What can I do for you?" "I have something you need to see." I handed him the envelope. "I would appreciate if you would read this before the next board meeting." He opened it right there and started reading. I watched his eyebrows climb steadily higher as he worked through the pages. When he reached the part about the security footage, he looked up sharply. "You have video of Patricia's dogs doing this, clear as day, time-stamped and dated. I also have footage of them running loose multiple times over the past 2 weeks, all in violation of HOA rules." Tom flipped through the rest of the letter, his jaw tight. "How many other homeowners have you talked to?" 7 so far who were willing to share their stories. "I suspect there are more. There are definitely more." He folded the letter carefully and met my eyes. "I have been trying to rein in Patricia's behavior for months, but I am outnumbered on the board. This evidence, though, this changes things." "What happens now?" "There is an emergency board meeting provision in the bylaws. If 2 board members call for one, it has to happen within 72 hours. I will talk to Susan. She is not as deep in Patricia's pocket as the others. If we can get this in front of the full board with your evidence on the table, we might be able to force some accountability. And if that does not work, then you do whatever you have to do, and for what it is worth, you will have my full support." That conversation gave me hope. but I did not stop my other preparations. On March 30th, I contacted a local news station, Denver 7, which had an investigative segment called Problem Solvers that dealt with consumer issues and local controversies. I sent them a brief summary of the situation along with samples of the evidence. A producer named Ashley Reeves called me back within 3 hours. "Mr. Fletcher, I have reviewed what you sent, and I have to say, this is exactly the kind of story we love to cover. Would you be willing to do an on-camera interview?" "Absolutely. But I want to give the HOA one more chance to make this right before we go public." "When is your deadline?" "April 3rd. "Perfect. If they do not respond appropriately by then, we can have a crew at your house on April 4th. I will start doing background research on Meadowbrook Commons and this Patricia Thornton in the meantime." Everything was moving into place. On April 1st, Tom Brennan called me. "Susan and I have called for an emergency board meeting tomorrow evening at 7. You are invited to present your evidence. Be prepared for Patricia to fight back hard." "I am ready." The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the entrance to Meadowbrook Commons that was used for HOA gatherings and neighborhood events. I arrived at 6:45 with Marcus Webb, my lawyer, and a folder containing printed copies of all my evidence. The board members were already seated at a table at the front of the room. Patricia sat in the center, her expression cold and hostile. Linda and Gary flanked her on either side. Susan, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled into a bun, sat to Gary's left. Tom sat at the far right end, physically separating himself from the others. There were also about 15 other homeowners scattered through the chairs, word having spread that something significant was happening. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Meadowbrook Commons HOA Board has been called to address a dispute regarding a citation issued to Mr. Harrison Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood and walked to the front of the room. Marcus set up a laptop and portable projector while I arranged my materials. "Thank you for the opportunity to present this information," I began. "On March 18th, I received a citation for failing to clean up dog waste in the common area near my property. The fine was $250. The problem is that I do not own a dog and have never owned a dog." Patricia interrupted. "The waste was on the common area adjacent to your property. You are responsible for that area. Let me finish, please." I clicked to the first image on the projector, showing the citation and the photographs Patricia had included. These photos show dog waste that had been buried under snow and was only revealed when the snow melted on March 16th and 17th. As you can see from the condition of the waste, it had been frozen for an extended period. I clicked to the next slide, showing weather data. Boulder received heavy snowfall from February 10th through February 28th. The common area behind my property was completely snow-covered during that entire period and remained covered until the recent thaw. Any waste currently visible was deposited before or during the snowfall, meaning it has been there for at least 3 weeks. Another click, another slide. I have no pets and no visitors with pets during that time frame. However, I do have a comprehensive security camera system that covers my property and the adjacent common area. I reviewed the footage from February, and this is what I found. I played the first video clip. The timestamp showed February 8th at 3:15 in the afternoon. Patricia's 2 golden retrievers appeared on screen, running loose through the common area. The video clearly showed both dogs defecating in the exact locations later photographed in my citation. The room went silent. Every eye was locked on the screen. I played a second clip from February 9th showing the same dogs doing the same thing. "These dogs," I said calmly, "belong to Patricia Thornton, the HOA president who issued my citation. They were running loose in clear violation of HOA rules requiring all pets to be leashed. The waste they left was not cleaned up, also in violation of HOA rules. That waste was then buried under snow for a month, and when it reappeared, I was blamed for it." Patricia's face had gone bright red. "That is preposterous. Those could be any dogs. The timestamps are clear. The breed is clear. And I have additional footage from the past 2 weeks showing the same 2 dogs running loose repeatedly." I played several more clips in rapid succession, each one showing Patricia's dogs wandering unsupervised through the neighborhood. On March 19th, March 20th, March 21st, and March 23rd, all violations of HOA leash requirements, all documented. Tom leaned forward. "Patricia, are those your dogs?" "They occasionally get out, but that does not mean." "It means you issued a fraudulent citation to cover up violations committed by your own pets," Marcus said, standing. "It also means you have been selectively enforcing HOA rules while violating them yourself. My client has documented evidence of a pattern of abuse and unfair enforcement affecting multiple homeowners in this community." I handed printed copies of my evidence to each board member. "I am formally demanding that the citation against me be withdrawn immediately with a written apology. I am also requesting that the board take appropriate action regarding Patricia's violations and establish oversight to ensure fair and consistent rule enforcement going forward." Susan was flipping through the pages, her expression growing more troubled. Gary and Linda looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Tom was nodding slowly. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "This is an ambush. You cannot just come in here with edited video and expect us to." "The video is not edited," Marcus interrupted. "The timestamps are verifiable against weather data and other records, and if you would like to dispute this evidence, we can do so in court. My client is fully prepared to file a lawsuit for fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority." I suspect other homeowners would be interested in joining such an action. Several people in the audience nodded and murmured agreement. Tom cleared his throat. "I move that we withdraw the citation against Mr. Fletcher immediately and issue a formal written apology. I further move that we open an investigation into enforcement practices and establish a neutral third-party oversight committee." "I second the motion," Susan said immediately. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but the hostile stares from the audience seemed to convince her otherwise. "Fine, all in favor." Tom and Susan raised their hands. After a long moment, Gary reluctantly raised his as well. Linda kept her hand down, but the motion carried 3-2. "The citation is withdrawn," Patricia said through gritted teeth. "Meeting adjourned." "Not quite," Tom said. "We still need to address Patricia's own violations. I move that the board issue citations to Patricia Thornton for multiple leash law violations and failure to clean up pet waste, as documented in Mr. Fletcher's evidence." The room erupted in applause. Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "I do not have to sit here and be insulted in front of." "You are a board member and a homeowner," Tom said firmly. "You are subject to the same rules as everyone else. We are voting on this motion." Susan raised her hand. "I second." The vote was 3-2 again, with Gary switching sides after seeing the mood of the room. Patricia was officially cited for her violations, the fines totaling $600. She stormed out of the meeting with Linda hurrying after her. Gary stayed behind, looking shell-shocked. After the official meeting ended, several homeowners came up to thank me and share their own stories. Robert Chen, who I had spoken to earlier, shook my hand vigorously. "You just did what half the neighborhood has wanted to do for 2 years. Thank you." Jennifer Morrison was there too, tears in her eyes. "She fined me during the worst week of my life, and I just paid it because I did not have the energy to fight. Can I get that money back?" Marcus handed her his card. "Contact me. If enough people have similar situations, we might be able to pursue a class action for refunds and damages." By the time I left the clubhouse at 9:30, Marcus had handed out 24 business cards and had preliminary interest from 18 homeowners in joining a potential lawsuit. But I was not done yet. The next morning, April 3rd, I received an email from Patricia containing a terse, 2-sentence apology and confirmation that my citation had been withdrawn. There was no acknowledgement of her own wrongdoing and no indication that anything would actually change. I forwarded the email to Ashley Reeves at Denver 7, still interested in that interview. Her response came within minutes. "Absolutely. Can we do tomorrow morning at 10? The news crew arrived right on schedule." Ashley was a sharp woman in her 30s with the kind of energy that suggested she loved her job. The cameraman was a quiet guy named Phil, who spent 20 minutes setting up the perfect shot of me standing in my backyard, with the common area visible behind me. The interview lasted about 30 minutes. I walked them through the entire story, showed them the original citation, played portions of the security footage on my laptop, and explained the pattern of abuse that other homeowners had experienced. Ashley asked pointed questions and took extensive notes. "This is going to make a great story," she said as they packed up their equipment. "We will probably air it next week. I am also going to reach out to Patricia Thornton for comment. Good luck with that." The segment aired on April 10th, during the 5 o'clock evening news. It was a 7-minute piece titled "HOA President Fines Resident for Her Own Dog's Mess." The video footage of Patricia's dogs was shown clearly, along with my interview and interviews with 3 other Meadowbrook Commons homeowners describing their own citation issues. Ashley had indeed reached out to Patricia for comment. Patricia had declined an on-camera interview, but had provided a written statement saying that the matter had been resolved internally, and the HOA remained committed to fair enforcement of community rules. The statement rang hollow next to the video evidence and the litany of complaints from residents. The story exploded. Within 24 hours, it had been picked up by other Denver news stations and had gone viral on social media. The Meadowbrook Commons HOA Facebook page was flooded with comments, most of them negative. The story was shared thousands of times, and people from across the country weighed in with their own HOA horror stories. On April 12th, I received a call from the Colorado State HOA Oversight Office. A woman named Diana Martinez explained that they had received multiple complaints about Meadowbrook Commons following the news story, and were opening a formal investigation into the HOA's practices and finances. "These investigations typically take several months," Diana explained, "but given the publicity and the volume of complaints, we are prioritizing this case. I will need you to provide copies of all your evidence and a detailed statement. Happy to help." On April 15th, there was another emergency HOA board meeting. This time, the clubhouse was packed with over 60 homeowners, many of whom I had never seen before. They were angry, vocal, and demanding change. Tom Brennan had taken control of the meeting. Patricia was conspicuously absent, as was Linda. Gary sat at the end of the table looking miserable. Susan was there, along with a lawyer the HOA had retained to deal with the fallout. Tom addressed the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. In light of recent events and the ongoing state investigation, the board has voted to implement several immediate changes. First, Patricia Thornton has resigned as HOA president and from the board effective immediately. The room erupted in cheers. Tom waited for the noise to die down. Second, we are establishing an independent oversight committee made up of homeowners who are not on the board. This committee will review all citations before they are issued and will handle all appeals. Third, we are conducting a comprehensive audit of HOA finances and enforcement actions over the past 3 years. Any homeowner who believes they were unfairly cited can submit a request for review, and if the citation is found to be improper, they will receive a full refund. More applause. Someone shouted, "What about Patricia's fines?" Patricia owes $600 for the violations documented by Mr. Fletcher. Those fines remain in effect. If she does not pay within 30 days, the matter will be turned over to collections and potentially to law enforcement, as we would do with any homeowner who refused to pay legitimate fines. The meeting continued for another 2 hours as homeowners shared stories, asked questions, and volunteered for the new oversight committee. By the end of the night, a foundation had been laid for real reform. Marcus Webb contacted me the next day with an update on the potential class action lawsuit. I have 23 homeowners who want to join the suit, with claims ranging from unfair citations to improper fee assessments. The total damages we are seeking are approximately $48,000, plus legal fees and punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company has already reached out asking if we would be willing to settle. What do you think? I think we have them over a barrel. The publicity has been devastating for them, and the state investigation is going to turn up even more problems. If they offer a reasonable settlement that includes full refunds for everyone affected and agreement to the oversight reforms, I would recommend taking it. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming, even when you are certain to win. What is reasonable? Full refunds, all legal fees paid, written acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and agreement to implement all proposed reforms. Plus a provision that Patricia Thornton is permanently barred from holding any position in the HOA. That works for me. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. The HOA's insurance company was eager to make the problem go away, and with the state investigation looming and the media attention continuing, they had very little leverage. On May 7th, we reached an agreement. The HOA would pay full refunds to all 23 homeowners in the class action, totaling $49,200. They would pay all legal fees. They would issue a formal written apology acknowledging improper and discriminatory enforcement. They would implement the oversight committee and reform measures, and Patricia Thornton would be permanently banned from serving on the HOA board or any HOA committee. But the story did not end there. On May 20th, Deanna Martinez from the State Oversight Office contacted me again. "Mr. Fletcher, I wanted to give you a heads up that our investigation has uncovered some serious financial irregularities. It appears that Patricia Thornton was using HOA funds for personal expenses. We are talking about thousands of dollars over a 2-year period. Landscaping for her personal property that was billed to the HOA, personal purchases made with the HOA credit card, even a vacation that she claimed was for an HOA conference that did not exist. How much are we talking about? So far, we have documented approximately $37,000 in fraudulent expenses. We are still reviewing records, so that number might go up. This is beyond civil penalties. We are referring the case to the Boulder County District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution." I sat down heavily. I knew she was abusing her authority, but I did not realize it went that deep. Financial misconduct is disturbingly common in HOAs with poor oversight. Patricia had unilateral control over the budget and the credit cards, and she took advantage of it. The good news is that your actions in exposing the enforcement issues led directly to this investigation. If you had not come forward, this might have continued for years. On June 8th, Patricia Thornton was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The local news covered her perp walk, and the story made headlines again. The woman who had tried to fine me for her own dog's mess was now facing potential prison time for stealing from the very organization she was supposed to serve. The preliminary hearing was held in Boulder County Court on July 15th. I attended along with Tom Brennan, Susan Miller, and about 20 other Meadowbrook Commons residents. We watched as the prosecution laid out their evidence: credit card statements, forged receipts, falsified expense reports, and a paper trail showing systematic theft over more than 2 years. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that there had been misunderstandings and poor record-keeping, but the evidence was overwhelming. On August 3rd, faced with the prospect of a trial she could not win, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $37,400 to the Meadowbrook Commons HOA. I was sitting in the courtroom when the judge handed down the sentence. Patricia's face was pale, her hands shaking. The confident, controlling woman who had wielded power over the neighborhood with such arrogance looked small and defeated. As she was led out of the courtroom, I felt no satisfaction or vindication. Just a sad recognition of how easily power could corrupt, and how important it was to stand up against injustice, even when it seemed easier to just pay the fine and move on. The Meadowbrook Commons HOA underwent a complete transformation in the months that followed. Tom Brennan was elected as the new president. The Oversight Committee, which I served on, reviewed and revised all the HOA rules to ensure they were clear, fair, and consistently enforced. 3 homeowners who had been on the receiving end of Patricia's most egregious violations were elected to the board. Property values in Meadowbrook Commons actually increased following the reforms, as the neighborhood gained a reputation as a well-managed community with engaged residents and fair governance. Several real estate agents specifically mentioned the HOA reforms in their listings. I became something of a neighborhood celebrity, though I did not particularly want the attention. People stopped me at the mailbox to thank me or to ask advice about their own HOA issues in other communities. I gave interviews to several news outlets and HOA reform organizations, sharing my story in hopes that it might help others facing similar situations. Marcus Webb used the case as a launching point for a new specialty in his practice, representing homeowners in HOA disputes. He told me I had given him enough material for a book. The security camera system that had captured the crucial evidence got an upgrade. Several neighbors installed their own systems, and the Neighborhood Watch program was revitalized. Crime dropped. Package theft disappeared. The common areas were better maintained than ever because people actually cared about the community. Now, instead of resenting the petty tyranny that had defined it before. On a cool evening in late September, almost 6 months after the original citation had appeared on my door, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when Tom Brennan stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might want company," he said, holding up the bottles. "Always." I grabbed the beers and pulled 2 chairs up to face the common area, the same area where Patricia's dogs had started this entire chain of events. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "You know," Tom said eventually, "when I ran for the board, I thought I could make small incremental changes, push back against Patricia's worst impulses, maybe make things a little bit better. I never imagined we would end up completely transforming the HOA and sending the president to jail." "Neither did I just did not want to pay a fine for something I did not do. It was more than that. You could have paid the fine and moved on. A lot of people would have. But you stood up, did the work, gathered the evidence, and refused to back down. That took courage or stubbornness. Sometimes they are the same thing." Tom took a long drink of his beer. "The State Oversight Office contacted me last week. They are using our case as a model for HOA reform legislation they are proposing. Better financial controls, mandatory independent audits, oversight requirements. If it passes, HOAs across Colorado will have to implement the same kind of reforms we have made. That is good. No one else should have to go through what we went through." "Agreed. And it would not be happening if you had not decided to fight back against a $250 fine." We clinked bottles and drank to that. The burgers were done and Tom stayed for dinner. We talked about football, the upcoming election, and whether the Broncos had any chance of making the playoffs this year. Normal things. Easy things. But as I lay in bed that night, I thought about the journey from that first citation to where we were now. The frustration, the investigation, the confrontations, the legal battles, the arrests, and finally, the reforms. It had been exhausting and stressful and consuming. There had been moments when I wondered if it was worth the effort, if I should have just paid the fine and let it go. But looking back, I knew I had made the right choice. Standing up against injustice, even small injustice, even inconvenient injustice, was always worth it. Because injustice never stayed small. Left unchecked, it grew and spread and infected everything around it. Patricia had started with petty power plays and unfair citations, but that mindset had led her to embezzlement and fraud. The same arrogance that made her think she could blame me for her dog's mess made her think she could steal from the community without consequences. And if no one had stood up to her, she would have been right. The Meadowbrook Commons HOA was not perfect now. There were still disputes and disagreements and rules that some people thought were too strict while others thought they were too lenient. But there was accountability. There was transparency. There was fairness. And there was a community of people who had learned that they had power when they worked together and refused to accept abuse. My lawyer Marcus often said that the law was only as good as people's willingness to enforce it. The same was true for HOA rules, for community standards, for basic decency. It only worked if people cared enough to hold each other accountable. I had cared enough to hold Patricia accountable for a fraudulent fine. That decision had cascading effects I never could have predicted, ultimately leading to criminal charges, prison time, and systemic reform. But it had started with one person saying, "No, this is not right, and I am going to prove it." In early October, I received a letter from the Boulder County District Attorney's Office thanking me for my cooperation in the case against Patricia Thornton. The letter noted that, without my initial documentation and willingness to come forward, the investigation into financial crimes would never have been triggered. I pinned the letter to my refrigerator, next to the withdrawn citation that had started everything. A reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. The story made occasional appearances in the news for months afterward. In November, Colorado state legislators held hearings on proposed HOA reform legislation, and several Meadowbrook Commons residents, including myself, were invited to testify. The bill passed the state legislature in March of the following year and was signed into law by the governor in April. Homeowners across Colorado would now benefit from stronger oversight, mandatory financial audits, and better appeals processes. The reforms would not prevent every problem, but they would make abuses like Patricia's much harder to get away with. Media outlets continued to contact me periodically for follow-up interviews or to comment on other HOA disputes. I became something of an accidental advocate for HOA reform, though I always made clear that I was not an expert, just a homeowner who had refused to accept being scapegoated for someone else's violations. In the spring, the Meadowbrook Commons HOA held its annual meeting and election. Tom Brennan was re-elected as president by an overwhelming margin. The oversight committee I served on was made permanent and given expanded authority. And the residents voted to establish a community fund to help homeowners fight unfair citations, ensuring that people would not have to choose between paying an unjust fine and spending thousands on legal fees. I thought about Patricia sometimes, serving her sentence in the Boulder County Jail. I wondered if she understood what she had done wrong, or if she still saw herself as the victim of a witch hunt. I hoped she was getting the help she needed to address whatever had led her down that path. But mostly, I thought about my neighbors and the community we were building together. The block parties were better attended now. People looked out for each other. When someone had a problem, others rallied to help. The atmosphere was completely different from the tense, fearful environment that had existed under Patricia's rule. On a warm evening in May, exactly 1 year after the settlement was finalized, the HOA threw a community appreciation barbecue. Nearly every household sent representatives. Kids ran around playing tag while adults chatted and laughed and shared food. Tom gave a short speech thanking everyone for their engagement and commitment to making Meadowbrook Commons a true community. As the sun set and the party wound down, Jennifer Morrison approached me. She was the woman who had been fined during her hospital stay, one of the first people I had talked to when I started investigating Patricia's pattern of abuse. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for the refund, though that mattered, but for showing us that we did not have to just accept being treated badly. My daughter is 10, and I want her to grow up knowing that you stand up to bullies, even when they have authority. Especially when they have authority. You showed us how to do that." I did not know what to say to that, so I just thanked her and gave her a hug. Later, as I walked home through the common area where this had all started, I paused at the spot where Patricia's dogs had left the waste that led to my citation. The grass was green and well-maintained now. Kids from the neighborhood used this area as a shortcut to the playground. Dog owners walked their pets here, always on leashes, always cleaning up after them. It looked like what it was supposed to be, a shared space for a community to enjoy together, governed by fair rules that applied equally to everyone. I thought about that first morning, standing in my bathrobe, staring at a citation for something I did not do. I had been angry and frustrated and ready to fight. I could never have imagined where that fight would lead, but I was glad I had fought. Not just for myself, but for every person who had been mistreated by someone abusing their authority. For every homeowner who had paid an unfair fine because they did not have the resources or energy to contest it. For every community trapped under the control of petty tyrants who used HOA rules as weapons instead of tools for collective benefit. The changes we made in Meadowbrook Commons rippled outward, influencing state law and helping homeowners across Colorado. And it had started because I had security cameras, a stubborn streak, and a refusal to accept being blamed for someone else's mess. As I reached my front door, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb. Just settled another HOA case using your playbook. Client had video evidence of HOA president violating the same rules he was citing others for. HOA folded immediately and agreed to reforms. You started something good. I smiled and replied, "Glad to hear it. Keep fighting the good fight." Inside my house, I poured a glass of bourbon and settled onto the couch. The evening news was on, and there was a story about an HOA dispute in Fort Collins that was following a similar pattern to what had happened in Meadowbrook Commons. The homeowner being interviewed mentioned our case and said it had inspired him to stand up and demand accountability. I raised my glass to the screen. Good for you. Do not back down. The segment ended and I switched off the TV. Tomorrow I had an oversight committee meeting where we would review 3 citation appeals. All 3 appeared to be legitimate issues that needed addressing, and I was confident we would resolve them fairly. That was the difference now. The system worked. It was not perfect, but it was fair and it was accountable. That was all any of us could really ask for. As I finished my drink and got ready for bed, I thought about all the small decisions that had led to massive changes. Installing security cameras for package theft that ended up documenting HOA violations. Taking the time to research weather data and review footage. Talking to neighbors instead of fighting alone. Bringing in a lawyer instead of trying to handle everything myself. Going to the media when official channels were corrupted. Refusing to give up even when it would have been easier. Each decision had been small in the moment, but together they had transformed an entire community and helped change state law. I wondered how many other people were facing similar situations right now. How many were standing in their bathrooms in the morning, staring at unfair citations, deciding whether to fight or just pay the fine and move on. I hoped my story would reach some of them and give them the courage to fight. Because the truth was simple. Authorities who abuse their power only continue doing so as long as people let them. The moment someone stands up, gathers evidence, and refuses to back down, the whole corrupt structure starts to crumble. Patricia Thornton had thought she was untouchable. She had a compliant board, control over the finances, and a neighborhood full of people too tired or intimidated to challenge her. She had gotten away with it for years, but all it took was one person with security cameras and a refusal to be scapegoated to bring the whole thing crashing down. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because of revenge or vindication, but because of what we had built from the ashes of Patricia's corruption. A real community, governed fairly, where people looked out for each other and held their leaders accountable. That was worth fighting for. That was worth every stressful moment, every confrontation, every hour spent reviewing footage and compiling evidence. In the end, it had not been about dog poop or a $250 fine. It had been about justice, accountability, and the kind of community we wanted to live in. We had fought for that and we had won. And somewhere out there in other neighborhoods and other states, other people were fighting similar battles. I hoped they would win too. I hoped they would stand up to their own Patricias, gather their evidence, refuse to back down, and build something better from the wreckage. Because that was how change happened. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through ordinary people deciding that enough was enough and doing the hard work of holding power accountable. I had done that work. My neighbors had done that work, and now we had a community we could be proud of. As I finally fell asleep, I smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new problems to solve, but we would face them together as a real community with real accountability and real fairness. And it had all started because someone tried to fine me for dog poop that came from their own unleashed pets. Life was funny that way. The smallest injustices sometimes led to the biggest changes if you cared enough to fight back. I cared enough. We all did, and that made all the difference.